When working on unsolved cases, investigators typically have to wait for new evidence or for new technology to be implemented before the case can finally be solved. Some cold cases are so old that they need to be reopened when new evidence is discovered, and even then it's possible that it may remain an unsolved mystery. Number 5. James Amabile, a 38-year-old man from Ridley Township in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, mysteriously disappeared on the 4th of December 2003, and his cold case remained unsolved until 2002. At around 4:30 p.m. on the day of his disappearance, James phoned his children's babysitter to let her know that he was running late, but that he would be picking them up soon. When he hadn't returned home by 10 p.m., his wife phoned the Ridley Township Police Department to file a missing person report. When his phone records were examined, it was found that it had pinged off a tower close to the babysitter's house, and a search was launched to track down his vehicle, a green 2002 Ford Explorer. But despite their best efforts, investigators came up empty. Then, on the 19th of March 2002, officers were called to the Ridley Township Municipal Marina when a report came in of a vehicle that had been found underwater. The call was made by Adventures with Purpose Underwater Dive and Recovery, a search and recovery dive team. When the vehicle's license plate was checked, it was found to belong to James's missing car, and thanks to dental records, he was positively identified soon after. The divers stated that when they found the vehicle, they discovered that a pylon had unwittingly been drilled through the front end by workers who'd built a dock there some time ago. The dive team is actively working on other similar disappearances and hopes to continue producing solved mysteries for the families of those who have gone missing. In this case, they were able to do so after nearly 2 decades of uncertainty. Number 4. In 1988, Diane Don was working at the San Diego Transit Corporation as a communications technician, and when she failed to show up for her shift on the 2nd of May, a coworker made a grisly discovery, resulting in a cold case that was finally solved in 2022. When her colleague went to her apartment to check up on her, he found Diane deceased in her bedroom. The San Diego County Sheriff's Office found that she had been attacked with a sharpened blade, but her 2-year-old son had thankfully been left unharmed. At the scene, investigators recovered a hair from Diane's hand and took samples from under her fingernails. But the ensuing investigation failed to turn up any useful leads, and Diane's case went cold for 34 years. Then, in 2000, the samples were sent for testing, and they were found to belong to Diane's attacker, but it was unclear who the DNA belonged to. In 2001, the samples were run through the FBI's Combined DNA Index system, but the DNA had degraded to the point where it was no longer useful. 19 years later, in 2020, a cold case team worked alongside a crime lab to focus on genetic genealogy in hopes that a suspect would finally be identified. In this process, an individual is identified through family trees and genealogical markers matching a biological relative. In this case, investigators created 9 family trees consisting of 1,300 individuals. And after direct relatives gave DNA samples, they finally got a result. The original DNA samples were found to belong to Warren Robertson, a tow truck driver who lived in the same apartment complex as Diane in 1988. Robertson had left his family shortly after Diane's passing and moved to Indiana in 1989. On the 25th of November 1999, Robert's life ended when his house caught fire. Investigators were unsure whether Diane and Robertson knew each other, but noted that they were both racing enthusiasts who attended the El Cajon Speedway. Though Diane's attacker will never face the punishment for his heinous crime, her family has stated that they're relieved to have a conclusion to the cold case that was finally solved just 2 weeks after what would have been Diane's 63rd birthday. Number 3. The cold case involving 18-year-old Marilyn McIntyre started on the 11th of March 1980, after her husband, Lane, arrived home from his shift at a paper plant in Columbus, Wisconsin. As he approached the front door of their house, he noticed that their dog was chained up outside and barking, which he found unusual. As he stepped inside, however, he was shocked to find Marilyn deceased. She'd been attacked with a blade, and he described his shock as being inside a tunnel. After making sure that their 3-month-old was safe, Lane contacted his parents, who then called the police. At the scene, they found no sign of forced entry, suggesting that Marilyn knew her attacker and willingly let them into the house. When Lane was questioned, he told investigators that he'd been at work at the time, but his alibi was shaky as he usually worked unsupervised and was allowed to take breaks, possibly giving him time to travel home to commit the crime. It was also found that he had taken out a life insurance policy on Marilyn's life just days before, and he was considered a prime suspect. Fingerprints were found at the scene along with biological material and hair from an unknown source. Investigators were able to establish the time of the murder when a neighbor told them he'd been woken up at 3 a.m. after the family's dog started barking when it was let outside. But another suspect was soon identified. Marilyn's family and friends told police that a man named Curtis Forbes was angry at Marilyn after she had given advice to his girlfriend, Deborah Adelson, and suggested that she end their relationship. Forbes was questioned, but he also had an alibi, stating that he'd been out drinking at a bar at the time. He said that after leaving the bar, he went to see a friend of his called Lori Beatty and her boyfriend at around 1 a.m. Lori confirmed that he had indeed been there, but at some point he left to get more beer and never returned. When asked about the discrepancy, Forbes stated that he decided to go to Deborah's place instead. Deborah confirmed that he had indeed spent the night there, but noted that he hadn't arrived until 4 a.m. Forbes was unable to account for the 3 hours in between, and after his police interview, he fled. However, in the absence of any hard evidence, he was never charged, and it became a cold case for the following 27 years, with Marilyn's family contacting the Columbus Police Department on a regular basis to hear if any new evidence had been found. In 2007, Marilyn's niece accidentally called the Columbia County Sheriff's Office and their detectives, who were unaware of the case, but took interest in it. They decided to investigate and sent the biological material to be tested, finding that it belonged to Marilyn and an unknown person. Lane volunteered a sample, and it was found to not be a match. He was finally ruled out as a suspect after decades of suspicion. Lori then came forward and stated that Forbes had asked Deborah to wash his shirt that night, as it had biological material on it. When Forbes learned of the new investigation, he hatched a plan to fake his own disappearance by making it look like his inflatable raft had sunk in Lake Michigan. But he never got that far, as Deborah confirmed Lori's claims and he was arrested. Forbes was charged with first-degree murder, and he was found guilty, receiving a sentence of life in prison. Number 2. In 1983, Scott Johnson moved from California to England to study mathematics at the University of Cambridge, and by 1986, he had moved to Canberra, Australia to complete his PhD at the Australian National University, and to be with Michael Noon, a man that he had met at Cambridge. On the 10th of December, 1988, however, Scott was found deceased at the foot of the Bluefish Point Cliffs, near Manly in New South Wales. His clothes and personal belongings were found on top of the cliffs, and at first it was thought that he had ended his own life. Scott's brother, Steve Johnson, disputed these findings, but despite this, the cold case wasn't re-examined until 2017, when a coroner found that foul play was involved. A $1 million reward was offered to anyone with information on the case, and Scott's family raised the reward to $2 million. Then, in 2019, investigators received an anonymous letter, later found to have been written by Helen White, the wife of Scott White, in which she stated that White had bragged to her about assaulting gay men. After this, she conducted her own investigation and came across the name of Detective Chief Inspector Peter Yeomans, who was the head of the new investigation into Scott's case, and she decided to write the letter. White was arrested, and he told investigators that he'd met Scott at a bar that night, after which they went to North Head Cliffs. At some point, they got into an argument and Scott fell, but the judge overseeing the trial found that White had struck Scott intentionally and caused him to fall. He was found guilty and sentenced to serve 12 years and 2 months behind bars. Number 1. 32-year-old Lee Radtner's cold case started in June of 1982, shortly after she moved from Nunica in Michigan to Council Bluffs, Iowa, where she started work orientation at the Jenny Edmondson Hospital as a food service director. As she was new to the area, Lee didn't have a permanent residence yet, and so she decided to stay at the Best Western Frontier Motor Lodge near I-29 and I-80. Her first official shift was to be on the 25th of June, but she never showed up for the shift, and her boss contacted the hotel. Staff members at the hotel went to her room to check on her and found that she'd been attacked and her life had been ended. Some of her valuables were missing, and at first it was believed to be a robbery gone wrong. DNA was collected from the scene, and it was periodically submitted to the State of Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, and the DNA profile of a man was identified, but this left investigators no closer to identifying the culprit. For the next 18 years, no further progress would be made in the case until April of 2019, when the samples were sent for testing once again, this time to the Parabon Nanolabs in Virginia, which deals with DNA phenotyping, a process that predicts the physical appearance of a person based on their genetic information. From here, familial relationships are identified, and in February of 2021, it was found that the DNA belonged to Thomas O. Freeman from West Frankfort, Illinois. This information was sent to the State of Iowa DCI lab, which analyzed Freeman's daughter's DNA and found it to be a familial match. But they then learned that Freeman's life had been ended, and he was found in a shallow grave on October 30th, 1982. Police considered the possibility that Freeman's case may be linked to Lee's, but as his killer has never been identified, this theory could not be confirmed. Whether this theory is true or not, Lee's case was finally solved thanks to advancements in DNA technology, putting a rest to an unsolved mystery that plagued investigators for 40 years. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.